the focus of IP management has changed quite a bit over the past, would say, 20, 30 years. From having focus on really registered rights, usually patents and trademarks, maybe a bit of designs, to IP as a more integral part of how business value is generated. And we've seen that change, I think, coming from a few kind of visionary leaders in the domain and settling in actually more or less recently with more people and with a broader audience. And I think that change has really helped us to consider IP and intangible assets as a part of business and doing business, and not as a kind of isolated element handled somewhere by patent attorneys in a dusty attic. Maybe we need to then go back a little bit also to what are the changes we've seen over time. The perspective on how IP and intangibles create value for a company have changed a lot. And in digital, that is actually kind of put under a magnifying glass. And you see that actually it's very important to look at IP as an integral part of your business and to kind of diversify how you think about IP and about the people who have ideas on intellectual assets, who create intangibles. It goes much broader than the original kind of inventor concept of people doing technical inventions, but reaches out in a more broader way to those who innovate in marketing, but also in software development. So it spans across the company much more, and in digital that is really emphasized. Another thing we see a lot in digital, which is challenging, is that IP starts to play a different role. Where in the past it might have been more of a kind of IP is there to exclusively bring products to market, to increase your market share, to protect what you do. This is very clearly also visible in how people handled brands in the past. You see this more moving towards a way to interact. IP being there to help people form relationships in a broader ecosystem, and we see that in digital there is an ecosystem where people act in business ways, like you team up between suppliers and innovators and people who bring the final product to market, but you also see it in how people team up across departments within a company. And I think that makes it kind of an interesting challenge to understand each other a bit more, to really see where do intangibles play a role in the company and to speak each other's language. And that's a challenge, I think, in the digital domain. The first one is look at intangibles in a broad way, building on what I said before. Do not focus narrowly on registered rights. Take a look outside what is happening in the IP department. Take a look at people who handle, for example, data, regulations related to data privacy, regulations related to new developments, for example, in Europe around Digital Markets Act, Digital Services Act, AI Act. There's so much of IP in there that you need to take a broader perspective, get people from multiple directions into your teams to really establish a strong intangible strategy. And the second one I would say is don't overcomplicate matters. Over time, IP has a tendency to have become an interest or a hobby of professionals, really deep professionals. And of course you need that. But I think taking a step back, reducing it a bit from the complexity and looking really at it as a business asset is what I try to explain to also smaller companies that I work with. Because I feel that they deserve their own seat at the intangible table, but I actually can only do that by not making it too complex, because they don't have these large teams of huge kind of different profiles and professionals. But in the end, when you strip it down to the basics, it's about how you generate value for the company. And that is, although it's a complex matter, it does not need to be of a very high complexity when you have that discussion. Well, you ask now about what will be the impact. I think the impact is already there. IP is a domain where you have many very innovative professionals. So there have been people avant la lettre basically who have applied AI already in solutions that either support inventors or support patent attorneys in their role, or support the businesses by creating very clever insights using AI. So I think it's already there. For the future, I think what we need is a little bit more kind of well-defined view on what it can do, making it a little bit more kind of a standard way of practice, and making sure that the regulations around it are there to stimulate but also draw the right boundaries when those are needed. And I think that's a longer term future, that it will be kind of settling in as something that everybody understands can be of value, because it will be, but also understands that it needs to be regulated somehow to get that value to the optimum and not lean towards the side of where people see risk and threats. Well, I think both the change to new business models and new ways of using intangibles for value creation and applying AI in innovation and in how we handle our jobs as IP professionals will be driven by next generation. And I see that happening, and I think it's very important to involve them as well, because they've been all raised in a different kind of context and society, one of sharing, one of giving each other access, and not one of complete private ownership and exclusive ownership. And the sharing economy that they are actually building around us now is one that I personally would like to encourage. I think it's also, in terms of ESG and the future of the planet, a very important one. And I think as IP people, we need to listen to that generation really, really well to make sure that we continue with the IP system in a way that matches with what is happening in society.